Hi everybody, Charis here. I'm in the woods, well actually in the park in my hometown of Emporia, Virginia, and it's been an interesting trip. I came back because I did a workshop in Richmond, and I have been speaking to some of the people who own one of the big plantation houses still here in town. It's called Village View, and it used to be one of the main, it used to be many acres. If you're familiar with Emporia, which is on the 95 line close to the Virginia-North Carolina border, it went almost down into what the next little area is, which is called Skippers, the plantation of this particular house. So anyway, I went through and did some ghost sleuthing for them, and it was really unexpectedly fascinating. All of the things that I expected didn't really happen, and things that I didn't expect did happen. Being raised as a biracial person in the South has always been, oh, she's gonna go after those big ants. She is a predator, even though I feed her mostly vegetarian. It's been an interesting upbringing because really what ends up happening is there are all these warring factions within you. If you're not raised in a culture that's still largely racist with two main races battling it out, and you happen to be made up of those two specific races, then maybe it won't matter that you're multicultural. Maybe there are some people who won't know what I'm talking about here. I went to college and had some people tell me that racism still didn't exist, and so I don't know if they thought I was lying or exaggerating or what, but growing up here was pretty difficult because, for instance, you know, you're in high school and you're exploring the options of romantic relationships, and a lot of my friends weren't allowed to date me because they were one race and I was both. But whatever race they were, their parents saw me as being completely the other race rather than the two together. So it's a pretty interesting way to come up. And then also being intuitive, of course, I could feel everyone's emotions, so they didn't even necessarily have to say anything, even though I didn't know that I was intuitive. So that's my personal history, but even still, without that being my own personal history, there is a lot of stuck energy in this particular town. The town and the time that I grew up in was really fraught with issues, especially with young women. I'm assuming young men too, but I think it evidenced in a different way. There was a lot of wrist slitting, there was a lot of depression, there was a lot of wheel jerking, and people ask me what that is, and it's when a girl and a guy are in the car on a backcountry road winding around, they're having an argument, and she jerks the wheel and plows them into a tree. And it didn't happen every month or anything, but it did happen often enough so that you knew what it was, and so that if you heard it, you didn't have to say, what was that necessarily? So, you know, that's not normal. It's not normal for a small town to be that way. And why? Why is it that way? Why, when I came back this time, was I driving down the road and feeling this despondency before I even got to Emporia, when I was still up in Richmond, which is about an hour north of here? And so I started looking around and seeing why this was in my experience, seeing what I could possibly do to assist in whatever needed to be done. Just like in the human body, if you have an injury, there's going to be pain because your body wants you to pay attention to the injury. In the greater world, that is the same as well. So if a place has problems, a place has scarring, then it's going to keep showing you that scarring through pain and through events until you help it to heal. And this particular area was reasonably close to where the settlers first came when the United States was first discovered, right, although there were already people here. And this was a place where Native Americans did live, so they got kicked off or murdered. I don't really know the history of them in this particular area. But after that, who were the next people connected with the land, really deeply connected? The slaves. And so they were, of course, abused. And so the land here is really crying. The land here is really upset and sad and hurting and traumatized. And the people end up showing that, because one thing that I've noticed while walking around in this park today, she's just too independent for me lately, while walking around in this park today, is that no one really consciously loves the land right now. People might go outside and enjoy it, but in this particular town there's a culture which is a more inside culture, or if you're outside for a reason. You're out playing a sport, or you're out going from one place to another, not just enjoying nature. Even though it is a largely farming community, or at least it used to be when I was growing up here. So I would urge anyone who's in a small town, I mean, look, it's beautiful here. Look around. Here, let me show you what I see. Look at how beautiful. Look at this rich, beautiful greenery and just amazing life everywhere. So there are things that you can do to enjoy it. You don't have to be in some famous vista like, Mount Shasta or Sedona or the beaches of California. There's beauty everywhere if you go outside. Nature is beauty. We are evolved to plug into the natural system and be nourished by it. So please do it wherever you are, because the land needs you as well. So back to Village View, what I discovered was that the people who were involved in the Civil War, I had a certain perception of what they must have been like internally, because that's what we're taught now with the ideas of human rights that we now hold, which at that time, people didn't hold those ideas. I mean, of course, the people being persecuted did, some of them, but not all of them did. It's like any area, any time where there are limiting beliefs. And I thought about how to present this to you a lot, because I know some people will be very triggered by that likely and say, what are you talking about? Human rights are always human rights. You should always know better. But I think a good way to present it, and some of you might also be triggered by this, and there is no judgment, but when I was falling asleep last night thinking about how I would present this video this morning, this came to me, and what I would like to talk to you about to draw the parallel is animal rights. So the very same people who are complaining about human rights, might be the ones who eat hamburgers and cheeseburgers and beings, the flesh from beings that have been farmed in concentration camp-like conditions, and definitely slavery conditions, being locked in cages. And I'm not someone who is a big horn tooter for let's talk about all the horrible things done, because I don't believe that that's helpful. I believe it is good to know stuff, but I don't like publishing all these pictures on Facebook of the horrible things done. I think that that's the wrong vibration to bring. And I think people who do it, who do eat factory farmed meat, who do go to fast food restaurants who use factory farmed meat, showing you a picture of this stuff happening is not going to make you not do it. In fact, it might even make you do it more, because it gives you a strong reaction, and it makes you feel like if you were to listen, you might feel like you were a bad person, so people just block it right out. However, it is true that we do see beings as objects, and we do see beings as possessions. And how can you say what the internal life of a cow or a chicken is? I don't know what the internal life of a cow or a chicken is, but I know that pets, animals that we do see as companions, have intelligence. And raising this little girl right here, who's now so spunky and teenagery and independent and doesn't even always sleep with me anymore. Last night I got worried because I couldn't find her. I found it this morning. She'd crawled somehow into a drawer and slept there all night long. I have no reason to think that she's stupider than me. I have no reason to think she doesn't think about things. When I watch her, she's thinking about things. So who am I to say what beings have intelligence and what beings don't? Just because they don't speak and just because they don't feel the need to fiddle with stuff the way that humans do doesn't mean that they're in any way lesser of creative preciousness and sacred life. So the fact that we, without a thought, go and factory farm these animals and torture them and do terrible stuff to them without anesthesia and kill them in really painful ways and make them live these horrible lives and don't even think about it, why is that very different from being a slave owner and seeing a group of people as people who are possessions and as people who aren't intelligent and don't really count as humans, right? So when I was doing this reading, I didn't expect this. I expected to go in there and say, well, this was the way the people were, and da-da-da-da, because when I do readings, especially ghostly readings, which is what I was looking for in Village View, I get the feelings of the people. I get the way that they felt. I get the things that they experienced firsthand, as if they were speaking to me or as if I was reading their diary. And there were some interesting things that happened. I was looking at the birth and death record in the family Bible of one of the women who lived there and actually had a quite tragic death, which I found about right after this event. And my eye fell on fell on the date of her death, and something fell in the room. That there was no wind and no reason this thing should have fell, and it had been sitting there for a long time, and just fell down and made this huge crash through the space. So things like that were happening, and so interesting stuff did happen. I'll tell you guys more about that another time. But mostly what I felt was that the people who lived here were very duty-oriented people. They weren't bad people. They didn't feel like bad people to me. That was just the world in which they lived. And they were taught that that was normal. Much like generations of people who have marriages that aren't monogamous, And I don't mean agreed non-monogamy. I mean people that cheat on their husbands and wives, because they never think that there's anything wrong with that. I know some people like that, or I have known some people like that. I'm not particularly close to them now. But there are so many reasons why people do the things they do, and most of them I find are because they've never thought about it, and because they've never wondered if it was the best thing to do. And so for those of you who are still really scarred by the emotional and even physical, through cell memory trauma, of human rights issues in our nation, I urge you to think about what people have done in a different way. And not only what people have done in a different way without necessarily assuming blame or a character judgment on the value of their worth as a being. And I'm not talking about the people who actually do terrible things. I'm talking about like races of people, groups of people, making huge, wide-spreading statements about an entire section of the population. Because what that does is it just puts breaks within you, and it just rips up your own internal view of the world, and so it's just going to cause you more injury. Some of the most racist people I know always talk about how other people are racist, and they're completely unaware that they're racist. And so it's just injury. But I have a fly buzzing around me now, so I'm going to guess that means it's time to change direction. Those of you, flies have been interesting totem animals for me lately. They've been showing up everywhere, even as I've traveled all across the country the past several weeks. And so finally I looked them up, and they are change directions, because they change direction so quickly. So when I'm out in nature and a fly buzzes around me, I know that it's time to move on to something else. Anyway, so the Civil War, these people, at least the people who I was looking at, were just fighting for what they believed was a noble way of life. Now we think it wasn't, but in a couple hundred years, what might we be saying about the people who are eating tortured and killed animals? Might we be saying they thought their way of life was fine? And maybe not, but it's something to think about if you want an illustration of how things could be different, and how the spot where you're standing might seem just fine, even if later your opinion might change. I'm not saying that all that stuff was okay, of course it wasn't, but I am saying that sometimes looking at people's motivations is surprising, and it can make you have more faith in human character and worth and goodness rather than less. Anyway, have a marvelous week, guys. I will be here in Virginia until next week, when I'm going back to California, and then some more travels. So I will hopefully be posting more, and go in peace. And I will talk to you again very soon.